Hey guys, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Life from the perspective of a military family member is way different than a civilian standpoint. Military children and family members give up their hopes and dreams to be able to stand by and support their service member, and it isn't an easy lifestyle for anyone to live. I hope that this podcast is able to help connect the military community and give others just a glimpse into what the military life is like from the perspective of spouses and children. Hi everyone, welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Today I'm here with Katie, who is an Air Force spouse. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to talk about my life as a military spouse, but more importantly, what my children have gone through, which obviously pertains directly to this podcast.
Yes, of course. So kind of start by telling me what it's like being a military spouse and the experiences you've had and the journey you've been on.
Sure. For me, it has been an unexpected journey. I did not grow up in a military family like you did. And in fact, I grew up in the same town that my parents were born in and their parents were born in. So to leave not only my hometown, but my state and not really have lived there for the past 15 years was not what I expected for myself. However, thanks to the military, I've been literally all over the world. My children have been all over the world. Like I said, we've been married 15 years. My husband just hit his 15-year mark in the Air Force, and we have PCS'd. I think this is move number 12 in 15 years.
Goodness.
So mathematically, that sounds insane. And it has been exactly that, insane. I've had babies born on TDYs. My youngest was born in Okinawa, Japan, and has a very interesting consular birth, born abroad birth certificate. So all these things, I think that if you had told me in, high school when I was, 16 that I would be doing, I think I would be shocked at myself. But it's been a unexpected, but also incredibly impactful and memorable life. And I don't think I'd change it. Maybe here and there, maybe fewer deployments, but it's been really neat. And we are now living in Hawaii. We've been here a year. We'll be here another year. And just the fact alone that we live in Hawaii and have had this opportunity to take our kids here has been phenomenal. And we feel very blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah. A lot of people, say they want to even just go vacation in Hawaii, like let alone live in Hawaii.
Well, and my children, bless their hearts, they don't understand how lucky they are just yet. So I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old who's almost 5. And, prior to this, like I said, we lived in Okinawa, Japan, which is some of the most beautiful beaches in the world.
Yes.
And then we lived in Monterey, California for a year and a half before this. Again, some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And now here in Hawaii. And I try to explain, people spend their whole life and their whole saved income to try to come to these places you've lived in. So I do hope when they look back, they realize how lucky they've been and how lucky I've been.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And like my fiance was
very fortunate.
Yeah. My fiance was just in Okinawa and seeing the pictures that he'd send me and all of that. It's incredible.
We would love to go back. I mean, who knows what's on the table next, but we would love to go back. It was a great experience. And the Japanese culture is a wonderful place to raise children. It was a great support system. And that's actually when we were stationed in Japan, that was the time at which I wrote my children's book, again, unexpectedly, but it had to do with my children experiencing, definitely not our first deployment by any means, but my son at the time had finally reached the age, I believe he was about 5, where he really felt his dad's absence for the first time, and he understood the length of time. And it was a game changer for us. So that's how the book Air Force Ace came to be. Was simply I wrote a story for my kids and thought maybe I should do something more with this or try, because clearly they're not the only children going through deployments.
Yeah, there are I was doing research for a college assignment and, 1.7 million military kids. Like there's an insane number of military kids and, all of them experience, similar journeys and, deployments and moving and, TDYs and everything, combined into it. And they all struggle in, different and unique ways through it. And it's hard at such a young age.
For sure. And, it's summertime right now, so it's PCS season.
Right.
And I've talked to a lot of friends about this, both with deployment and moving. You think the more you do it, the easier it gets, but it's entirely the opposite. Your children get older and they get more aware of their emotions and the absences and the big changes. And with those big changes come bigger emotions the bigger they get. So again, for somebody who grew up in one place my entire life until I was 18 and went off to college, I didn't know how to help my kids through that. I still am learning how to help my kids through those huge changes. And the truth is when my husband goes away and when your fiance goes away, those are hard on the adults.
Yeah.
So trying to manage your own emotions along with trying to help little children through it too there's not really a good recipe. You just kind of have to muddle your way through it each time. And each time comes with different set of circumstances.
Yeah. You never can, you said, unexpectedly for so many different things. And you have to be able to take those unexpected moments and, figure it out along the way, figure it out along the journey. And, it's hard on the spouses to understand some things, especially if you don't come from a military background. And then it's hard to be able to, convey it and put it in words that kids are going to understand.
Yeah.
And kids can be able to cope with it and get through those situations too.
And that was kind of what jump started me on writing Air Force Ace, which is basically a children's book I wrote for my own kids. And it's told through the lens of the family dog, which he actually exists. Air Force Ace. Ace is the name of the dog. And he will be 16 years old in October.
Wow.
And he's been all around the world with us too. So the whole point was, when my husband went on that deployment from Okinawa, my daughter was 6 months old and my son was, I think, about 4 or 5. And, my thought was, well, the most experienced of all of us with deployments is the dog.
Right.
So he's been through the most. So I wrote a story for them based on our dog's perspective of what he found out about deployments to bring home kind of the message or the knowledge of what a deployment is, because military kids hear that over and over and over again. But what does that mean? What does a deployment mean? For them, it just means my dad's gone or my mom's gone or my loved one is gone. But what does that actually look like in their head?
Right.
So the whole point was that the dog smuggles himself aboard his father's aircraft and goes to, it's never named, but a very desert-like place.
Yeah.
and finds out, that his dad is with other helpers, with other active duty members and what they're doing, what it looks like, sleeping. It's just kind of trying to give children an idea and a visual perspective of what their loved one is doing to make it a little bit less foreign, and also to kind of find commonalities between what their loved one is doing and what their daily life is like back home, to make it just a little bit less mysterious and a little bit less foreign. So that was the idea of the book. And I wrote it for my kids, like I said, and I didn't really intend to do anything more with it, but I've worked with a lot of military support agencies, like Military One Source or POTIF, which is an Air Force Special Operations Program, or the USO, or things like that. And there's a lot of material out there, which is wonderful. But I found that it was geared more toward little kids, like 3-4-year-olds. And while that's important, like I said, I found that the older my children got, the harder the harder the emotions got to manage, understandably, because they had bigger emotions. Their world was bigger, they understood more. So I thought to myself, there's kind of a gap, between little kids, what they're going through, and support of tweens and teens. And so I thought maybe that there was a place for the book to be geared toward those elementary age kids and talk to them a little bit more about deployment, because they're 100% aware of what's going on, and they 100% feel the absence of their loved one. And they deserve, they have big questions, and they need to have some real answers that aren't, sugar coated, I guess.
Yeah. And, once you hit that like tween and teen age, you really understand what's going on, because, you're exposed to more, you're in the schools, you have like, the news, like you have all these resources where you're like very aware what's going on economically, politically, socially, like in the entire world. You can understand that. But at an elementary age, you can't relate to that, and you can't understand what's going on. And so the thing of, okay, there's, people fighting, and why is, my parent gone, and why is my mom or dad fighting? You don't understand that at that age.
It's not easy to navigate how to answer a lot of those questions, but I found with my own children, they wanted real answers. I don't have to give them all the details. They don't need the nitty gritty, but they do deserve truthful answers that aren't without their questions being kind of pushed to the side. So that was the goal of the book, to give enough information to answer their questions, and also to bring them a little bit of peace and a little bit of confidence, and a little bit of pride simultaneously. Right. And to remind kids that they can have, and adults too, during going through a deployment, that they can have all those emotions. They can be proud of what their loved one is doing. They can miss them. They can be even a little bit angry. They can have all those things at once. That's totally normal. And that's what everybody has as a human being, is mixed emotions. And that's, I think, heightened with deployment, to know, like, yes, I'm proud that my loved one is away doing something important. I'm happy they're doing what they love, or I'm also mad that they're missing out on my baseball game, or they're not here for my birthday or what have you. So that was the goal of the book. And it's been interesting, because I wrote it, probably, almost coming up on 4 years. And the publishing process takes way longer than you think. And the illustration process takes way longer than you think. Right. And it was all brand new to me. And I don't know if your fiance or your dad is like this, but when I watch military movies with my husband, he will just, I don't want to say tear it apart, but he will notice everything that is incorrect and inaccurate and point it out. So I made it part of the book. Here, I'll show it to you. The illustrations. The illustrator and I worked painstakingly long hours to animate. The aircraft had to be correct. We wanted to make sure we showed a diverse group of active duty in terms of appearance and gender. But I knew that military families were going to be reading this. So I said, we have to make sure the illustrations are accurate. Yeah. No room for error. So we did really well on that. And it was published and finished in February of 2020. So I had we were in Monterey, California at the time. And I had lots of things lined up, like a meeting with Hearts Apart, which is a deployment, a program for deployed families. And that was at a Travis Air Force Base. So that's an Air Force specific, I think, Air Force specific program. But I had a whole thing lined up with them to go do like a meet and greet, bring the actual Air Force Ace dog. Yeah. And I had stuff with like the USO lined up, all these wonderful things. And then, of course, in March,
COVID happened.
The world shut down. Yes. So that definitely shifted my plan. Initially, it made me panic, to say the least, about like, oh my gosh, I have this book, and published book. And now what do I do?
Right.
But in a weird twist of fate, because the world shut down and because programs like Hearts Apart and programs that the USO would put on to bring deployed families together. What else? POTIF, which is Preservation of the Force and Family, another Air Force specific program. I worked with Army Community Services. All those programs couldn't do anything in person suddenly.
Right.
So it actually, I'm probably one of the rare people that COVID benefited, because what they instead did is they did bulk purchases of the book and then would distribute them like in curbside book bags, activity bags. And then we would do online readings and question and answers with Air Force ACE. So it definitely took a different turn, but it worked out really well. And in the end, reached a lot of kids. Yeah. And my favorite part is it reached a lot of military children at no cost to them, because these military agencies provided the funds to buy them and then distribute them to kids and families who were actually going through deployment. So that was actually a blessing in disguise. But when COVID initially hit, I was beside myself because everything that I had planned and kind of what I had envisioned for getting the book marketed, getting it out there, plan scrapped and back to square one. So, but yeah, so it's worked out, and it's been an unexpected journey. There's that word again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, COVID, changed everything, and there are things that have changed and improved, because of COVID, but there are so many things that have failed, because of COVID, and so many projects that had to have been pushed aside because of it. And, some things have begun to take shape again and some things haven't, but, just by like what happened with your book and being able to give it to military kids and to give it to them at no cost, it's like you're reaching so many more people, because, that's when it's going to get shared more. And, it's hard to get yourself out there like that. But sometimes, these situations that suck, like COVID, help to help spread the word and things like that.
Absolutely. And for me, that still is kind of the biggest challenge with the book. And I don't have a lot of confidence in self-promotion and self-marketing, but that is entirely what you have to do.
Yes.
Once you have that book in your hand, it is up to you to get it to the people that you want it to reach. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, but in the end, and even despite COVID, or maybe because of COVID, I reached out to the same agencies, the same military support agencies that I took advantage of when my husband was deployed, and I needed to rely on those. So I needed to rely on the USO for just support in various ways and things like that. So I reached out to the very same people who supported me, and with the hope being that I can kind of return a little bit what I've taken and what I've reaped. Yeah. So it's been a nice kind of full circle when it came to that.
Yeah, it's definitely, something that I'm realizing in the military community, which is so awesome and incredible, that, these spouses, come in, as kind of like, the freshmen in high school or of college, and, they're learning, and I'm included in that, I'm learning and everything. And so you go through this process of trying to figure everything out and trying to learn everything. And there's so many military spouses that have gone before, and they're like, giving back and teaching and helping learn. And whether that be through, even children's books, like, because I'm going to have kids one day, and I'm not going to know what to tell them, even though I was a military kid. It's so different in the world nowadays. I grew up with the Afghanistan conflict, and that's what my dad fought in. There's going to be something else that, my fiance will fight in, or, take part in. And I'm not going to understand what my kids are going through with that.
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day about just in my 15 years as a military spouse, when my husband and I first got married and he went on his first deployment, you know, that was the time when they lived in what was called like the bee huts, like the plywood shacks, basically. And you'd have a scheduled phone call that was limited, or, you know, eventually it became Skype, you know, scheduled, but nevertheless, it was still scheduled. It was still limited. You could see somebody in the background walking back and forth, timing, you know?
Right.
And if you weren't home to answer that phone or to be on that Skype meeting, you would miss your loved one for the week, you know?
Yeah.
And by the time my husband had his last deployment, you know, he had Wi-Fi in his room and we could FaceTime. So it's an ever changing, obviously the world is ever changing, but even within such a short period of time, the military family is ever evolving. And, like you were saying, even for you, even though you're a military child, like what you went through versus what your children will go through is going to be entirely different.
Yeah. And, you know, technology is going to just continue to evolve. And while right now we're like, okay, well, you know, deployments are going to come and we're not going to be able to talk much, you know, through deployments. Who knows in, you know, 15 years what it's going to look like, and, you know, the communication that he could have on the other side of the world, you know, back home here.
Yeah. It really is nuts how much it's changed in such a short time, and it's going to keep continuing that way.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk to your fiance much in Okinawa?
He's not there anymore. He's back in the States. So when he was there, we talked quite a bit though, but the 13-hour, 14-hour time change is a lot. And so that made it difficult. He thinks I'm crazy for doing this, but I would literally wake up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning to talk to him for between 10 minutes and an hour. And then he'd go to bed, and then he'd wake up at like 3 or 4 my time to, you know, start going to work.
Right.
And we'd talk, you know, between then and when I'd go to bed, and I'd stay up till like 12 o'clock, like midnight, 1 o'clock, talking to him because I could. And you know, everyone's like, you're so crazy for doing that. And he thinks I'm crazy for doing it too. But it's like, you have to do what you have to do sometimes.
You have to make the space. You have to make the space. It's an unorthodox life. And you have to, if you don't adapt and if you don't make the time and the pattern of like just making it work, you're just going to face challenge after challenge. So you might as well, you know, create the habit of figuring it out, because that's really all you can do. I actually had to, last year, I did a reading for preservation of the force and family at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. Oh, wow. And they scheduled me. Neither party on either side really thought through it much. But by the time I did the math, I was like, okay, I guess I'm getting up at 3:30.
Oh my gosh.
In the morning. And I think it was like a 4 p.m. I can't quite remember, like a dinner time. They did a really lovely like dinner and book drop off for deployed families. Again, COVID. Right. But it was a great solution given the circumstances. And I was still really excited to be a part of it, especially because we had just come from Kadena. Right. But nobody did the math on that.
That's why everyone would ask me what time it was there.
But, you know, I was the only one who...
Yeah. They'd ask me what time it is there. And I'm like, well, so like here right now it's 4:27. It's like 5:27 a.m. there.
Right. Tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. It's still like Monday here. It's Tuesday morning there. Yep. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's 10:28 here in Hawaii time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other like huge struggle is like, you know, finding times across even time zones too.
Yep. And my husband typically, the aircraft he flies at night. So that always throws an additional wrench into it that, you know, you're across the world, but your nights are your days. Like it's very confusing.
Yes.
I always have to have like a separate clock that has his actual time. And then I have to remind myself that, oh yes, but he's also sleeping during the daytime where he is. So you have to factor that in. So it's exhausting.
Yes. Well, the last question I always like to ask is, what advice would you give to another military spouse?
Sure. I think that if I could go back and be where I am now and talk to myself when I first joined this lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I've had people say to me, and it's very unhelpful. So this is one piece of advice. Never say to an a military spouse, well, you know what you got yourself into, because you don't.
Right.
You fell in love with somebody and you decided to share your life with them, and life in general is unexpected for everybody,
Yes.
But you really don't know what you're getting with the military. And even the military member, when they initially sign up, has no idea what's coming their way. So that's very unhelpful, I think, when people say that. It certainly doesn't, whatever you're going through, it doesn't change it, and it doesn't make it less painful or less challenging. So really what you're needing in those moments is support and sympathy, or just somebody to talk to, not, hey, get over it kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think what I encourage spouses to do, and what I would encourage myself to do, and I had to learn this, and everybody kind of has to go through their own learning process, but just do your best to jump in wherever you are, whatever your comfort zone is. Do your best to jump into the community, to find your people, or at least a person. There've been times and there's been locations, I think, where they were not where I wanted to be. And it can be easy to go down the road of isolating yourself and being upset and just wanting the time to pass and to get on to the next location, or to get through the next TDY, or to get through the next deployment, and to just wish that time away. But then when you have children, especially, you realize that that's not a way to live life, and you don't want them to do that either, to wish the time away.
Right.
So my advice to my younger self, and my advice to any young military spouse, is just do your best to connect in the local community. Do your best to connect to whatever military location you're in, whether it's your favorite place or your least favorite place. And I think more often than not, you'll hear a military spouse say, like, I did not like that location when we first got there.
Yeah.
We've been in some really remote and unattractive places, a lot of desert places. And in the end, they end up being some of your favorite places, because you just meet people, and because you don't have a lot maybe to do, whether it be outdoor activities, or there's just it's not a bustling place to be, you really lean on each other, and you become second family, and as you go about your military, your spouse's military career, and you of course follow that along and you adapt to the military life, you will have relationships with people, from 3, 4, 5 bases or locations or camps or forts previous, that are still your people. I still talk to, on a daily basis, people, girlfriends from, when we were in England in 2000, over a decade ago, and they're still your people. And you just have to put yourself out there a little bit, be a little bit bold to connect with those people, and the support you'll get back in return is life-giving, and it makes military life not just bearable, but really rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And, it's so important to create that community around you, and, more or less fall in love with wherever you are, no matter what it takes.
Absolutely. And I think that with that, you can't always expect the community to come to you. You have to put yourself out there a little bit, whether it's, joining a mom's group if you're a young mom, or if it's becoming part of the spouses program, or a key spouse, or even just a part of a local volunteer group or something. Just find something that interests you and latch on and put yourself out there. And I think that a community will develop around you, and you'll find your people, and you'll often carry them with you.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing so many different things and sharing about your book. Where can people find you on socials?
Sure. So the best option is to find me on Instagram at Air Force Ace Book. And not only is the book itself available, if you reach out and contact me via that method, you can also purchase a signed copy, including a dog paw print from actual Air Force Ace. But I do like to post kind of the adventures of Ace himself. So you get to kind of see where Ace has been as well and what he's doing on a daily basis in his old retired age in Hawaii. And then you could also email me at airforceacebook@gmail.com, or there's also a Facebook page, Air Force Ace, or a children's book, Air Force Ace, a children's book. So
awesome.
Yeah, all those methods are great. And then there are various copies still available at like Army Community Services, depending on where you are, or through POTUF, Air Force, that kind of stuff. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gracie, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child and Life. Make sure to set a reminder for every Tuesday to listen to a new episode. You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Grace of a Military Child and Life. If you have any questions or want to be on the podcast, send a message to one of our social media platforms or email grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. See you next week.